The late summer air hung heavy over Warren County, Tennessee. The forest behind Sister Miriam Farah's cabin swayed gently in the warm breeze, rustling with the sound of birds and unseen creatures. Deputy Elias Carter pulled his cruiser off the dirt road and parked under a cluster of sycamores. Dispatch had received an anonymous tip something about a strange smell coming from the woods behind the old woman's home. He adjusted his uniform collar and stepped out, feeling gravel crunch beneath his boots. Everyone in town knew Sister Miriam, quiet, polite, Muslim, a widow who kept to herself. Some folks respected her, others whispered behind her back. Elias, he wasn't sure what to think. He'd seen her at the farmer's market, always dressed modestly in long skirts and a soft gray hijab, selling wild herbs and hand-woven baskets. He approached the cabin with measured steps. The place looked the same as always: clean porch, a Quran resting by the window, wind chimes whispering prayers in the breeze. Miriam was nowhere in sight, but the side gate to the woods stood open. Elias followed the worn footpath that twisted between towering trees. 10 minutes into the woods, the air shifted. The sweet scent of honeysuckle gave way to something earthier, sharper. That was when he saw an area where the ground had been recently disturbed. The dirt was piled unevenly, and a weathered wooden plank stuck out like a broken tooth. Elias knelt and brushed off a corner of the wood. A single word, carved into it, made his stomach tighten. Granger. His hand instinctively went to the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch. This is Deputy Carter. I've got a possible grave marker. Coordinates to follow. The forensic team arrived hours later. The grave had been shallow, poorly concealed, and wrapped in a torn canvas tarp. No casket, no headstone. The bones were old, at least 2 decades. Still, dental records confirmed what many feared. The body belonged to Sheriff Thomas Granger. Missing since 2005. News spread through Warren County like wildfire. The sheriff vanished without a trace. 20 years ago had been lying just yards from a quiet Muslim woman's home all this time. A woman who, by all accounts, had never left the county. The current sheriff, Alan Mercer, called Elias into his office the next morning. The air inside was stale and tense. "You were the one who found it," Sheriff Mercer said, folding his arms. "That grave wasn't deep. Hasn't been disturbed. She had to know it was there." Elias nodded, though a flicker of doubt tugged at his gut. "I agree, sir. It's hard to believe she wouldn't. She never reported it, never said a word. Either she's protecting someone or she's hiding something herself." Miriam was brought in for questioning that same afternoon. She didn't resist. She simply asked for a moment to pray before entering the interrogation room. Elias watched her from behind the one-way glass as she spread her prayer mat in the corner, quietly performing the salah with graceful dignity. "She doesn't look nervous," one deputy muttered. "She's not," Elias said. "She's just calm." When the questioning began, Miriam answered with clarity and quiet strength. "Yes, I knew Sheriff Granger," she said. "Years ago. Did you know he was buried behind your home?" She looked directly at the sheriff. "Yes. Do you know how he died?" Her silence was steady. "I do. Did you bury him?" A pause. Then, softly, "I did." The room froze. The air seemed to thicken. Elias leaned in closer, watching her face for signs of fear or deception, but found none. Her voice was steady. There was no triumph, no guilt, just truth. Sheriff Mercer narrowed his eyes. "Then you understand the seriousness of this, Ms. Farah. We'll be conducting a full investigation." "I understand," Miriam replied. "And when the time is right, I will tell you everything." As she was escorted to the holding room, Elias felt the weight of the moment settle deep in his bones. Something about this didn't sit right. The town had always spoken of Sheriff Granger like he was a hero, but heroes didn't end up buried in the woods behind a devout woman's cabin. He called his sister Layla that evening, a journalism student with a sharp mind and a strong sense of justice. She listened carefully as he relayed the events. "That woman knows more than she's saying," Elias said. "Then we need to find out who she was before she became Sister Miriam," Layla replied. The next morning, Layla Carter sat cross-legged on her dorm bed at Middle Tennessee State University, her laptop balanced on a stack of textbooks. The screen displayed a grainy photo of Sister Miriam at a local charity event, handing out winter coats to children. Her expression was serene, soft, but Layla couldn't stop thinking about what her brother had told her the night before. Grave behind her cabin, 20 years old. Sheriff Granger. The words echoed in her head. Layla wasn't just curious, she was determined. Journalism. to her, was more than storytelling. It was a responsibility to truth. She opened a new search tab and typed in, Warren County plus Thomas Granger plus missing person plus 2005. Articles popped up. Old headlines. Sheriff vanishes on hiking trip. No evidence of foul play. Wife files for legal separation. Days before disappearance. Wait, that was new. Layla clicked the last article. The sheriff had been married at the time of his disappearance to a woman named Maria Granger, a teacher at the county high school, known to be private, quiet. Then suddenly, she'd filed for separation just 5 days before Thomas Granger vanished. No children. No further public record of Maria after that. Layla stared at the screen, heart pounding. Maria Granger. Miriam Farah. Could it be? She called Elias immediately. I found her. At least, who she used to be. Elias was silent for a moment. You're saying Sister Miriam is Maria Granger, the sheriff's wife. She must have changed her name after the disappearance. Probably after converting to Islam. There's no record of her after 2005. Elias leaned back in his cruiser, mind racing. It made a strange kind of sense. He remembered something his mother had once said when Miriam first arrived in Warren County. That woman carries a sadness I can't explain. Back at the sheriff's office, Miriam sat alone in the interview room, her hands folded calmly. In her lap, her lawyer, a middle-aged woman in a plain suit, had advised her to stay quiet. But Miriam had asked for a meeting with Elias. I want to speak with you, she said when he entered, alone. The sheriff hesitated, but Elias insisted. The door shut behind them. Miriam looked up at the young deputy with eyes that had seen too much. You're wondering why I buried him, she said. Elias didn't respond, only nodded. I wasn't always Miriam Farah. I was once Maria Granger, his wife. Elias felt the words hit like thunder. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Because no one would have believed me back then. I didn't even believe myself. Some days, she stood and walked to the window, eyes distant. Thomas was not the man people thought he was. In public, he was kind, charming. In private, he was controlling, angry, violent. I hid the bruises. I smiled at church. I told people I was clumsy. Tears welled in Elias's eyes. He'd heard of cases like this but never this close to home. I left him in 2005, she continued. I changed my name. Found peace. Found Islam. It saved me. It gave me strength I never knew I had. Elias asked the question that had been haunting him. Did you kill him? She shook her head. He found me. One night, I don't know how. He was angry, shouting, threatening. He said no one would believe a woman like me. Said I'd dishonored him. I told him to leave. He wouldn't. We struggled. He slipped, hit his head on the stone steps behind the cabin. I tried to call for help, but he was already gone. Silence filled the room. Why didn't you report it? Elias asked, quietly. I was terrified. The sheriff missing, and his wife, the one who disappeared, now Muslim. Who would have believed me then? He couldn't argue. Miriam turned to him, eyes steady. I'm ready to face whatever comes next. I've had peace for 20 years. I won't run anymore. Elias nodded, unsure what he believed but deeply certain that this woman was no criminal. Layla's voice echoed in his mind. You have to tell her story. People need to know what really happened. And maybe, for the first time, the truth was finally finding its way out of the woods. The courthouse basement archives smelled of dust and old paper. Layla Carter adjusted her scarf and pulled open another drawer of microfilm. She had driven to Warren County early that morning, determined to trace the forgotten pieces of Maria Granger's life before she became Sister Miriam. She found a marriage license dated July 3, 1991. Thomas Granger and Maria L. Moreno. Layla raised her eyebrows. Moreno, that hinted at Latina heritage. She scribbled the name in her notebook. Then checked the local news archives for the following years. At first, there were a few mentions of Maria Shea had been a Spanish teacher at the local high school, praised for her kindness and community service. Then in late 2004, the mentions stopped. Around the same time, records showed Sheriff Granger began requesting unusual amounts of sick leave, citing family matters. Layla's hands tightened around the edges of the pages. She recognized the pattern. Isolation, silence, then disappearance. Back at the sheriff's office, Elias sat at his desk, flipping through a small box of evidence that had been recovered from Sister Miriam's cabin. Most of it was benign family photos, books, prayer beads, handwritten recipes. But one item stood out, a leather-bound journal, aged but carefully preserved. He hesitated. It felt intrusive, but Miriam had given him permission. If it helps. The truth. Read it. He opened to the first page. July 5, 1991. I am now Maria Granger. A wife. I thought it would feel like a dream, but already I feel Thomas was upset. I spoke Spanish to my cousin at the wedding. He says I shouldn't bring that stuff into our new life. I laughed it off. But I wonder, is this who he really is? Elias flipped forward. October 12, 1994, he lost his temper. Again today, he broke the vase my mother gave me. Said it was too foreign looking. I told him I was going to visit Mama this weekend, and he said, wives don't run off without permission. I laughed. HEDADN single quotes T. Page after page unfolded. The quiet unraveling of Maria's life. The facade of a happy marriage was only for show. In private, she had lived in fear. She had kept teaching until she could no longer hide the bruises. Her entries were laced with prayers even before she formally entered Islam. She had been searching. Then one entry caught Elias's breath. March 2, 2005, I met a woman at the library today. Amina, she saw me reading about Islam, and asked if I wanted to learn more. I said yes. I don't know why I said yes, but something in me said it was time. He flipped ahead. April 11, 2005, I said, the Shahada today, quietly, alone. I'm not ready to tell anyone, not even Amina, but I feel whole. Like for the first time, I belong to something bigger than pain. I belong to Allah. Elias leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a testimony. A story of survival and rebirth. He looked up just as Layla entered the office, notebook in hand. You were right, she said without preamble. Her name was Maria Moreno, married Granger in 91, vanished after filing for legal separation in 05. Elias handed her the journal. Read this. They sat in silence as Layla flipped through the pages, eyes growing wide, then soft, then wet with tears. She didn't just survive him, she whispered. She escaped him, and then she healed. Elias nodded. And then buried him behind her cabin. After an accident, after a confrontation she didn't ask for. Layla closed the journal. We need to help tell her story. Not just legally, but publicly. The community needs to hear this. Elias sighed. That won't be easy. People in this town still think the sheriff was some kind of saint. Layla's voice sharpened. Then they need the truth. Islam teaches justice. Yes, but it also teaches compassion, forgiveness, repentance. Sister Miriam lived with dignity and didn't retaliate. She didn't go to the media. She didn't seek revenge. She just wanted peace. Elias nodded. And now she deserves it. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, the kind that made the forest behind Miriam's cabin smell fresh again. But for Elias and Layla, the past was just beginning to lift its veil. Elias stood at the threshold of Sister Miriam's cabin, the front door creaking softly as he stepped inside. The interior was simple and neat, walls lined with books, a woven prayer rug in the corner, and shelves of dried herbs and tea blends. Nothing about the space screamed danger or deception. If anything, it felt like a home carved out of silence and sanctuary. He had a search warrant this time. Miriam had cooperated fully, even providing the key herself before returning to county custody. She'd said only, there are things in there that may help you understand. I am not hiding from the truth anymore. Layla joined him shortly after, tucking her scarf under her jacket hood as she stepped in from the rain. She'd brought a thermos of coffee and her ever-present notebook. It smells like cedar and tea, she whispered. Peaceful. Peaceful, Elias echoed. Except for the grave behind it. They started in the back room, where Miriam had kept a trunk filled with old belongings. Most were unremarkable. Photo albums, a few books in Spanish and English, and neatly folded scarves. But beneath a layer of quilts, Elias found something more significant. A locked wooden box. The key was tied to a string inside. A Koran on the nightstand. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Allah, not another person. Layla picked up one and read aloud. Oh Allah, I do not know what to do. He found me. I begged him to leave. I fear for my life again. But I will not run. Not this time. I ask you to protect me, to grant me peace, and to forgive me if I fail. I only want to live with dignity. The letter was dated August 14, 2005, the night Sheriff Granger went missing. Elias sat down. the weight of it all finally pressing on his chest. She documented it. She prayed about it. She feared him, right, until the end. Layla's eyes welled up. This wasn't premeditated. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. She was a woman pushed to her limit, who still didn't lift her hand except to protect herself. In the kitchen, they found a drawer with old receipts and letters, one addressed to a local shelter under her birth name, Maria Moreno. It included a note from the shelter director confirming she had stayed there briefly before moving into the cabin. See, Layla said. She followed every quiet, legal step to rebuild her life. She didn't hide in shadows. She just tried to live. Then, in the far corner of the cabin, Elias noticed a small alcove, a room barely larger than a closet. Inside was a woven prayer mat and a framed verse in Arabic on the wall. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Surah Olanshira, 94-6. Next to it, sat a short diary, separate from the others. It had only a few entries. The last one stopped. Both siblings cold. He came last night. I saw the same fury in his eyes. He told me I had shamed him, that I was a traitor to my own name, my marriage, my country. He lunged. I moved. He slipped. His head struck the stone step outside. I screamed, but no one was there. It was over in seconds. I buried him. I said a prayer. Not for what he had done, but for myself. For healing. For strength. I knew no one would believe me. Not then, but maybe someday, someone will. Maybe that someone is reading this now. Layla closed the diary and looked at her brother. She didn't kill a man in hate. She buried the final shadow of her trauma, and lived in its light for 20 years. Elias nodded, eyes still on the prayer mat. And now it's time the town sees that light. They gathered the documents, and letters, filing them as evidence but also as testimony. This wasn't a case for silence or shame anymore. It was a story about truth, one that spoke louder than the rumors circling town. That evening, Layla met with Imam Rashid at the masjid. She showed him the diary and letters. He read them quietly, then said, Sister Miriam has lived with patience more than many could bear. In Islam, hiding the truth to protect oneself is not a sin, but telling it when the time is right. That is courage. Layla felt her chest tighten. And now we must help her find justice. The truth was no longer buried behind the cabin. It had stepped into the light, ready to be heard. The courtroom was packed. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of Warren County's residents' friends, neighbors, curious onlookers, and those who had long whispered about Sister Miriam's quiet life. At the front, the judge adjusted, his glasses, eyes scanning the room. Before calling the session to order, Deputy Elias Carter sat beside Sister Miriam and her attorney. Miriam's expression was sereneness rooted in a faith that had carried her through 2 decades of solitude and pain. The prosecution was straightforward. They laid out the facts. Sheriff Thomas Granger had died on the property, buried secretly. The law demanded answers, accountability, justice for the man who had served the community. But when Miriam took the stand, her voice was steady, clear, and without anger. I did not plan his death, she said. I did not seek to harm him, but I lived in fear of him. I lived a life hidden behind walls of pain and silence. The night he died was not a night of hate, but a night when my survival was at stake. She spoke of her journey of the abusive marriage that had broken her spirit. The day she found Islam and rediscovered hope, and the accident that changed everything. Many in the courtroom were visibly moved. Some wiped away tears, others sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of a story long ignored. Imam Rashid Malik was called as a character witness. He spoke not only of Miriam's faith but of her service to the community, the herbs she shared to heal, the meals she prepared for neighbors, the patience and kindness she embodied. Islam teaches justice, he said, but also mercy. Sister Miriam has lived with both. She sought no revenge. She lives a life of repentance and peace. The defense argued for self-defense and a lack of intent to kill. They highlighted the evidence, the letters, the diary, the community support. This was not a case of cold-blooded murder but one of a woman pushed beyond her limits. Outside the courthouse, the community was divided. Some voiced support for Miriam, recognizing the courage it took to come forward. Others struggled to reconcile the sheriff's legacy with this painful truth. Elias watched the crowds, feeling the heavy burden of truth and justice. He caught Layla's eye across the street. She gave a small, hopeful nod. After days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned, not guilty on the grounds of self-defense. The room exhaled collectively. Miriam bowed her head in gratitude, not for the verdict alone, but for the chance to finally be free. As she stepped outside, Elias approached her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For your honesty, your strength." She smiled softly. "Alhamdulillah, praise be to God." In the weeks that followed, Miriam returned to her cabin, where the forest whispered its timeless prayers. The town began to heal too through dialogue and understanding. Elias found himself attending talks at the local mosque. Eager to learn more about the faith that had sustained Miriam, Layla began writing a memoir titled The Sheriff's Grave, a story of survival, faith, and the power of truth. Sister Miriam's story wasn't just about a grave behind a cabin. It was about courage to face the past, to seek justice, and to live with mercy. And in that truth, the community found a new kind of peace. After the courtroom verdict, one might think the story had reached its end. But in Warren County, the silence that followed was almost louder than the trial itself. Sister Miriam's life didn't immediately return to normal. The whispers that once simmered beneath polite smiles now edged closer to conversations at church socials and grocery store lines. Even those who supported her quietly struggled with the clash between the beloved sheriff's image and the truth that had surfaced. Elias noticed it first at work. Some deputies who had once greeted him warmly now avoided his gaze. Conversations stopped when he approached. The sheriff's grave had become a shadow that stretched across the whole department. Layla faced her own challenges. Her memoir, though praised for its honesty and sensitivity, met resistance from publishers who feared backlash from the community. Friends and classmates who once admired her dedication whispered doubts about whether the story should have been told at all. One afternoon, Elias visited Miriam at her cabin. The forest was quiet, and the sky hung low with a gentle gray. Miriam welcomed him in with a smile. But her eyes carried a quiet fatigue. "People find it hard to accept the truth," she said softly, "especially when it breaks the stories they've held onto for years." Elias nodded. The sheriff was a man many looked up to. The town needed him to be a hero. But heroes can be flawed, Miriam replied. "We are all human, and sometimes, the hardest truth is to face that." She invited him to sit beside her on the porch. They watched the leaves fall, thinking of the years lost to silence and fear. "Do you regret telling your story?" Elias asked after a pause. "No," Miriam answered firmly. "It was a burden I carried alone for too long. Speaking, it was my way of freeing not just myself but maybe others who suffer in silence." Elias thought of the women in the community, the ones who stayed quiet about their own struggles, fearful of judgment or disbelief. "We need to keep talking," he said. "Not just about you, but about all the stories that are hidden in the shadows." The local mosque hosted a community forum soon after, inviting people to share experiences and questions about faith, justice, and healing. Imam Rashid spoke of sabre, patience in adversity, and of the importance of mercy tempered with truth. Slowly, the town began to wrestle with its own history. Conversations that had once been taboo grew more open. Support groups formed awareness. Campaigns started about domestic abuse and mental health. Miriam returned to teaching herbal medicine workshops, inviting neighbors into her home with warm tea and gentle smiles. Her faith remained the anchor, and her courage became a beacon. Though the trial had ended, the real work was only beginning for Miriam, for Elias, and for a community learning how to heal through honesty. The dawn broke gently over Warren County, casting soft light through the tall pines surrounding Sister Miriam's cabin. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and earth, a reminder that even after the harshest winters, life renews itself. Miriam stood outside, tending to a small garden where herbs and flowers grew in neat rows. Her hands moved with care and grace, planting seeds that would bloom in time. It was a simple act, but one full of meaning. Like her own life, fragile yet resilient, rooted in faith and hope. Since the trial, much had changed, not just in the community but in Miriam herself. The whispers had softened into acceptance, and the walls built by silence were slowly coming down. Elias visited often, no longer as a deputy on a case, but as a friend and student. He had embraced the teachings Miriam shared, curious about the faith that had sustained her through decades of pain. Sometimes they sat together in quiet reflection. Other times they discussed the future and the work still needed in their town. Memoir, The Sheriff's Grave, was finally published. It told the story not only of Miriam's pain, but of her incredible strength, her faith, and her unwavering dignity. The book became a catalyst for conversation, a bridge between past wounds and future healing. At a local gathering, Miriam was invited to speak. Her voice, steady and kind, reached the hearts of many. Truth is never easy, she said, but it is the path to freedom. Islam teaches us that with hardship comes ease. And it is through mercy for ourselves and for others that we heal. The room was silent, listening. Her words inspired a community to reconsider old judgments, to open hearts to compassion, and to support those who struggle in silence. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Miriam stood at the edge of the forest, looking toward the town she had come to love in a new way. The grave behind her cabin was still their reminder of a painful past, but no longer a secret or a shadow. It was a testament to survival and faith. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, feeling the warmth of peace settle in her heart. New beginnings were not just possible, they were here.